video, I decided to do the Transcontinental Railroad. So a little bit of history about it is the first steam locomotive was invented in 1830, and then over the next 20 years, railroad tracks were found all over the East Coast because that was just the easiest way to get around and it was fast. And during this time, the settlers were beginning to move westward because they wanted their own land and wanted to live their own American dream. And then also, this was the start of what we now call the California Gold Rush, so that's another reason why a lot of people were moving there. And while some took the 6-month land route, which was known to be really difficult, a lot of people died from it. Others chose to travel by sea, and this journey took about 6 weeks, and it wasn't free of danger. A lot of people got yellow fever and other diseases that would spread rampantly throughout the ship. So, with the California Gold Rush bringing thousands of miners and immigrants to the West, this sparked an interest in uniting the country because they're oh, so many people are moving out here, why don't we make something where we're somewhat connected? And a man named Asa Whitney, he proposed to Congress in 1845 the idea of a railroad that would be federally funded that would start in the East and go down in the West. But Congress was really close-minded at that time, and they're yeah, no, why would we do that? But it's still stuck in a lot of people's minds, and they're maybe it could work. And during the 1950s, Congress finally was yeah, okay, that sounds like a good idea. And they sponsored a couple parties to investigate possible routes for the railroad. And one of these parties' name was Theodore Judah, and he believed that Donner Pass in Northern California would be the perfect spot to start building the railroad, and then he wanted to go through the Sierra Nevada mountains. And a year later, Theo enlisted a group of investors from Sacramento to form the Central Pacific Railroad Company, and after this he headed to Washington where he talked to Congress and Abe Lincoln and convinced them to sign the Pacific Railroad Act. So the Pacific Railroad Act said that there would be 2 railroad companies, and one would start up here, one would start down here, and they would meet somewhere in the middle, but it wasn't decided yet where they would meet. So the Central Pacific Railroad Company was to start in Sacramento, California, and then they would continue through the Sierra Nevada mountains, while the Union Pacific Railroad would start by the Mississippi River, kind of on the border of Iowa and Nebraska, and then they would just go down and somewhere meet. So the Central Pacific Railroad was dominated by the Big Four, which was really just 4 rich men who didn't know anything about the railroad company, but they were investors, and they wanted to make the most money out of this that they could. And Judah didn't like that. He was no, you guys don't know what you're talking about. You just have money. So he went out to go find different investors that hopefully would buy them out. But that didn't end up working because he got yellow fever and he died. Before anything started, he just kicked the bucket. But meanwhile, the Union Pacific Railroad, they celebrated an early launch, but nothing really happened because the Civil War was still going on. So after the Civil War ended, and in May 1866, they finally started making their way down towards the west. But they suffered a lot of attacks from Native American tribes who felt threatened, and rightfully so, because their land was being taken. But nonetheless, they continued to travel rather quickly because there wasn't a lot in the way. It was pretty flat and they just kept going. But the Central Pacific Railroad was struggling because there was a huge mountain, the Sierra Nevada, that they had to blow through, and it was not really working, and a lot of people didn't want to do it because they thought it was dangerous. So they ended up hiring a bunch of Chinese laborers, but not many people supported that because they had a whole bunch of racism and they just didn't like it. So finally, in the summer of 1867, the Central Pacific Railroad finally broke through the mountains, but the Union Railroad was already it's already made 4 times the amount of progress that they did. So they were starting making their way towards Salt Lake City because that's where a somewhat meetup place would be. But they were also cutting a lot of corners and making it kind of dangerous because they wanted to get there first. So in 1869, Ulysses S. Grant announced that neither railroad would be would be receiving any money until they finally decided on a place and got there. So they decided on Promontory Summit, which is just north of the Great Salt Lake. And on May 10th, the final spike was driven, and it combining the two railroads, and that was called the Golden Spike Ceremony.